Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Nightmare Theater, a book club for nightmares. I'm Sandor Desmond. I'm the host here at this show that I'm going to be doing weekly, every Sunday at 9 p.m. And I'm also the creator of most of the videos, all of the videos actually, on The Forgotten Grove. So first, tonight on the itinerary, I wanted to discuss a few things. So what this show's about and why I'm creating it. So I thought it would be fun to have a platform for sharing and open discussion of nightmares, which in the future you'll be able to send your own. So starting next week, send your own nightmares to theforgottengrove@gmail.com, and the idea is that I'll read it out and it will be an interactive experience. Tonight, I'm going to start with a bit of a presentation on sort of an introduction to nightmares, although obviously everybody knows what a nightmare is, but it might still be fun. And then in future live streams, I think there are other aspects of nightmare anthropology, history, famous nightmares perhaps, that I'd like to go into. As well, folklore. There's lots of rich history there that I'd like to explore. But primarily, this is about interacting together and discussing nightmares together. I want the vibe of this stream to be somewhat creepy, but mostly I want it to have a comfy feeling. I think it'd be fun to curl up with some tea, maybe under the covers on a Sunday night, and, watch along. This is my first time ever streaming, by the way, so please bear with me. And again, the stream will be 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. on Sunday nights, although if there ever gets to be, a point where there's so many viewers that I have to extend the length of the stream, then that's what I'll do. And again, feel free to chat in the sidebar at any time. I'll read it aloud if I'm not in the middle of presenting or reading something. So, I just want to get into a brief presentation now on nightmares. So, in terms of psychological nomenclature, there's a difference between nightmares and bad dreams. Specifically, people who remain asleep during bad dreams, whereas nightmares can awaken individuals. Nightmares have physical causes, such as sleeping in an uncomfortable position or having a fever, or psychological causes, such as stress and anxiety. Eating before going to sleep, which triggers an increase in the body's metabolism and brain activity, has also been shown as a potential stimulus for nightmares. The word nightmare is derived from the Old English mare, which is a mythological demon or goblin who torments others with frightening dreams while sitting on their chest, as depicted here in The Nightmare by Henry Fuseli in 1781. Even before Old English, most scholars trace the word back to the reconstructed Proto-Indo-European root mer, associated with crushing, pressing, or oppressing. The mare was also believed to ride horses, which left them exhausted and covered in sweat by the morning. She could also entangle the hair of the sleeping man or beast, resulting in mare locks. Even trees were thought to be ridden by the mare, resulting in branches being entangled, the undersized, twisted pines growing on coastal rocks on wet grounds. Mares included witches, who took on the form of animals when their spirits went out and about, and while they were in a trance, the witches, that is. These included animals such as frogs, cats, horses, hares, dogs, oxen, birds, bees, and wasps, all potential forms that the mare might take. Why do we have nightmares? Well, in a study focusing on children, researchers were able to conclude that nightmares directly correlate with the stress in children's lives. Children who experienced the death of a family member or a close friend, or know someone with a chronic illness, have more frequent nightmares than those who are only faced with the stress from school or their social life. However, of course, as we're all aware, adults have nightmares as well, and in the 19th century, scientists believed that nightmares were caused by not having enough oxygen. Therefore, it was believed that those with sleep apnea had more frequent nightmares than those without it. Studies were done, and the results actually showed that healthy people have more nightmares than those with sleep apnea. Another study that supports the hypothesis of oxygen deprivation, in which there were 48 patients, 20 to 85 years of age, with obstructive airways disease, and this included 21 with and 27 without asthma. These were compared with 149 sex and age-matched controls without respiratory disease. The airway obstructed disease subjects with asthma reported approximately 3 times as many nightmares as controls, or without asthma. The evolutionary purpose of nightmares was then assumed to be a mechanism to awaken a person who's in danger. A lucid dreaming advocate, Desmond has outlined a possible reason for how dreams are formulated and why nightmares occur. To LaBerge, a dream starts with an individual thought or scene, such as walking down a dimly lit street. Since dreams are not predetermined, the brain responds to the situation by either thinking a good thought or a bad thought, and the dream framework follows from there. If bad thoughts in a dream are more prominent than good thoughts, the dream may proceed to become a nightmare. Ultimately, although we have a good idea of why we have nightmares, they still occur spontaneously, and some can have a profound impact on our emotions, even at times when our lives are not under stress. This leads me to believe that perhaps in some cases they are warnings based on things in our subconscious that our conscious mind won't recognize. A modern understanding of nightmares suggests that nightmares are caused during the processing of memory, rather than being purely figments of imagination. Emotions are tied to those memories which emerge during the REM cycle of sleep, and they are a way of coping with change in our lives. And yet, in many cases, nightmares make no sense and are confusing, both in their subject matter and in the life situations in which they arise. There are clearly some nightmares that seem to have no basis in memory, which really makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up when I think about it. Sometimes you know exactly why we're having a nightmare, and at other times they surprise us with their bizarre and horrible content. And for that reason, they are mysterious and worth exploring. This leads me to believe that perhaps, in some cases, they are warnings, as I mentioned before, based on things in our subconscious. So today I wanted to start by sharing some of my better remembered nightmares and discuss them together. In the following weeks, as mentioned before, I would love to read and discuss your nightmares as well. And this is why I started Nightmare Theater, to explore nightmares together and have fun doing it. So, let's get into this. So I want to start by talking about some of the nightmares I remember from childhood, mostly. So my most recurring nightmare, let's go into that. So always after a high school semester or a university exam period, when the semester ended, for the next 2 weeks, I would have this recurring nightmare for the next 2 weeks after the semester ended. And it involved being afraid that my alarm clock was not going off and that I was late for an exam. So that's kind of a boring one, and you can obviously tell where it's derived from. But that is probably my most recurring nightmare in terms of just sheer number of times. I would say I've probably had that one over 100 times in my life. But maybe a more impactful nightmare that I can remember having at single-digit age. I was lying in bed, and I looked over to my desk, and in the space under my desk, there was this blue fire, and it burned hot. I could feel its heat, and I heard voices coming from it. A voice, I should say. It was one voice, and it spoke in a language I didn't understand. It was a language that wasn't a human language. And this nightmare terrified me, and I couldn't go to the bathroom at night because I was afraid to walk past my desk with this fire burning underneath it. And I just knew somehow in the back of my mind, if I walk past my desk, it's going to kill me. And another thing that I experienced with this particular nightmare was something called false awakening, which I plan on giving a presentation on in later videos. And false awakening is when in a dream you believe you're waking up, but you're still asleep. So I would believe I was waking up to go to the bathroom, and I really needed to go to the bathroom both in real life and in the dream, and then the fire would appear, and that was terrifying because I thought it was real life. So that, again, I had that recur about 50 times over a 3-year period, and that was a very difficult one. That may have, had the greatest impact of any nightmare I've had, but there's lots that I'll get into. Probably in childhood, maybe the second most recurring nightmare was me riding down my basement stairs in a wagon, which is something that I never actually did. I feel that you should know that, but and I would hit the bottom of the staircase in the wagon, and at that point a vampire would always come out from the left, and it would always almost bite me, and I would fly out of my cart because I was so afraid, and I would just be flying through the air, and I knew it was actually a semi-lucid dream. This is the closest I've really come to lucid dreaming, but I would be flying through the air, and I would have to count down from 5, and after that I would be able to leave the nightmare. And it was almost like hypnosis, like I was breaking myself out of hypnosis. And I was always aware that it was a nightmare at that point. Oh yeah, someone in the chat has also had a false awakening. Yeah, definitely not fun. The lucid dreaming's a lot more fun than the false awakening. And there was another one from childhood. This one recurred about 3 times in childhood, and then interestingly occurred again like 12 years later. And in this one, there's a series of tunnels under my house, and they're wooden and spidered. They're not cave tunnels or any other kind of crawl space, but they almost look like if you were to teleport 5 old abandoned libraries into each other underground. And there were areas that were so narrow that they were almost impossible to get through, but I would keep going. And in that dream, I always knew that there was something important down there that I was supposed to be looking for, but I could never find it. And I remember this one being somewhat claustrophobic as well. I do think I'm claustrophobic, so that could be part of the reason that I've had that one a few times. But there was a real sense of urgency, even when I was in an open space, that I needed to find something, and that there was something really worthwhile down there for me. I actually wrote a story based on this one too a few years ago. I haven't put it on my channel yet. But yeah, again, as I mentioned earlier, this occurred 3 or 4 times in childhood, and then again 12 years later, interestingly. And I wondered why it came back all of a sudden. And I still wonder that. It's an interesting concept. Another dream that I had, that I actually recently adapted for this one video I did, it was based on a real nightmare that I had. It was called, in my video, it was called "The Six Are Coming." In the nightmare, there were 5, and they weren't children. But it was actually Thanksgiving or Christmas or some family gathering with a large group of people. And everyone was in the living room, and I was off doing my own thing. And it must have been back in the 90s because something just clicked behind me that freaked me out. In the 90s, there were still phones that rang, of course. So in this case, the phone rang, and this deep male voice said, "The 5 are coming." And then there was like a moment of silence, and immediately following that, just chaos erupted, and all the windows shattered, and these guys that were almost like a SWAT team just came flying in and just started like murdering everyone. And yeah, basically, like, it was like the whole dream was essentially just that lead up to like a brutal me having to watch your own family die, which is obviously a terrifying thing to behold. I actually had a lot of dreams like that in adolescence, but this one was the most unique and the most horrifying for sure. And yeah, I remember just waking up from that and just being quite messed up by that. For the rest of the day, pretty much ruined my day. I also had a number of nightmares in quarantine that were quite wild and unique, and I've actually heard from several other people that they had quarantine nightmares that were wild and unique as well. And the first one I remember having involved me walking home from soccer practice in my hometown that I grew up in, but I was on the other side of the city from where I lived. And I decided to take a shortcut home through this neighborhood. I knew that the direction that it was facing was the right way to get home, but I didn't really know where I was or how the subdivision worked. And so I entered this dark subdivision, and there's a woman walking her dog towards me. And so I do, what I feel anyway is the polite thing at night, and I cross the street just, so that we're both not threatening to each other. And I start walking on the other side of the street, on the right side, and this guy walks past me extremely quickly. And he blows right by me, and I'm thinking like, oh wow, like what's happening here? But it's nothing. He just goes straight when he comes to the intersection and heads straight into this house. Meanwhile, I'm looking at my phone. I'm looking at Google Maps, and I see that it's telling me that the way out of the neighborhood is through a catwalk, or a series of catwalks. I think it was 2. So I take a right, and I go down this small hill, and at the end of the hill, there's a curve in the road, and there's a catwalk there, and it's covered by sort of a tunnel of concrete, which is, of course, unexpected. You wouldn't expect a catwalk to be covered in concrete, but it's a nightmare. What are you going to do? And so I go into this tunnel, and it's a very steep decline, and I can't see anything. I can't really see where the tunnel leads, even when I'm not standing within it. And I end up all of a sudden, I'm outside of a building. That's where the tunnel led, even though I couldn't see the building before I entered the catwalk. And I'm standing in this abandoned schoolyard, and there's just one single sort of yellow schoolyard light that's just buzzing away and illuminating the overwhelming dark over the grass. And you can just see, if you grew up in a subdivision or a what's it called, suburb, you know this look very well of just a single light fading over grass, and you can see the green, and then it just becomes a gray and then a black. And that was just around me on all sides. And then when I looked further, there was this high, like 20-foot high fence that was surrounding the entire schoolyard, and there was caution tape on all sides of the fence. And that struck me as being very odd. And the fence was also covering the catwalk that the map said I was supposed to pass through. So I quickly realized that that was a dead end in the dream. But I looked around and I looked to the left, and it was just more darkness in the yard. And I looked to the right, and there I could see inside the building through these large windows. And it was clear that it was some sort, like, it wasn't actually a schoolyard. It was some sort of industrial building. There was just piping everywhere, and there was another like outdoor side yard that I couldn't access through a different fence that had all this elaborate piping wrapping around itself. And I went back into the building, and I climbed the catwalk, and I went back out because I realized I wasn't getting through that catwalk. That fence was just way too high. And I climbed the hill again, and the map was now telling me as an alternate route that I should go into the house where the guy that I saw pass me earlier went into. And it didn't really make sense, but of course it does in a dream. So I entered the house, and I'm climbing the stairs in the house, and I hear a toilet flush on my left. And then I look straight ahead. I finally reached a hallway, and there are 3 doors ahead of me. One that goes straight, one that goes left, and then one that goes to the right. And I walk down to the end of that hallway, and I'm trying to contemplate which door should I go through here. And the guy comes out of the door on the left, like immediately, and we're both very startling to each other at that point. And I'm like alarmed to see him, and I assume it's his house, so I feel, guilty for even being there. And I asked him, do you know if I can access the street from here somehow? Because that's what my map is telling me. And he tells me, yeah, it's just through that right door. And I'm like, are you serious? He's like, yeah, it's through that right door. It's like, okay. And I believed him in the dream, although I think in real life I would be freaking out a lot more. But yeah, so I go through that door on the right, and it leads to a staircase that goes down, and I follow the staircase down. It's one of those staircases that has just the individual rungs without a back to it. So, if you slipped, your foot could go right through and you could get stuck. And I'm climbing down that staircase, and the wood is bending underneath my feet. And when I get to the bottom, I realize this is not the street. This is someone's basement. And that really scares me, of course, because I think he's trying to trap me there. And so I look back up, and he's just watching from the top of the stairs. And he's like, just go through that door there, and then there's a double door, and then you'll be on the street. And I'm like, okay. And I'm walking past ironing boards and musty looking couches and that sort of thing. And yeah, it really doesn't feel like this is going to lead to the street. And I open the first of the doors on the left that he's told me about, and there's no knob on the door, and it leads to another smaller looking room that just has one of those, industrial like washing sinks. And then I do see the second door, but it also doesn't have a handle. It almost looks like sort of a makeshift, like homemade jail cell. And of course, I'm not about that. So I look back up at him. I'm half expecting him to just push me into this thing and lock me in it forever. But I whirl around and I look at him and I yell up the stairs, "Are you serious, dude?" And then he just yells back, "Bro, just punch the door." And again, like in the dream, that was something that I was willing to do. Like, he seemed very sincere, but in real life, this would be a situation where I'd just be running back up the way I came for my life. But yeah, I go out through the door, and sure enough, there's the street right there. And I keep walking down the street, and I pass the other side of the schoolyard where the catwalk would have come out, and where that was fenced off before. And I look through that fence, and he's standing on the other side and just waving to me. And that was the end of that dream. That was a quarantine nightmare. I had quite a few others, though. I had one where a female co-worker of mine was talking about this guy who was, he used to say like creepy things to her or whatever, something of that nature. And I was kind of making fun of her about it and, cracking jokes, and she was describing this guy, and he had a very weird looking face and piercings all over him, and I start drawing this guy out. For some reason, this dream took place in a mall, outside of like a mall doctor's office. And all of a sudden she starts getting these calls on her phone from the doctor's office, and she's like, "That's the guy." And I'm like, what are you talking about? How do you know that? And she just said, "Oh, that's the guy, I just know." And all of a sudden I see my grandmother, and she's just walking towards me. And the thing about this that makes it very uncomfortable is that my grandmother is no longer with us. And she asks me if I want a ham sandwich. I'm just frozen solid at this point. And then she just turns right and phases straight through the wall. And I realized that it was the guy's doing. And he suddenly showed up. And then I don't even remember what happened after that, but that was another crazy one. That one really shook me. Yeah, I don't know. What other nightmares have I had? That might be it for this week, honestly. I think probably next week I'll start reading maybe stories from Reddit. But of course, I welcome anyone to submit a nightmare to theforgottengrove@gmail.com, and I'd love to read it aloud and we can discuss it together. And yeah, even if it's just disturbing or unsettling somehow or weird, that would be great too. Happy to read all nightmares. And also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you're reminded when I start streaming again next week. And that'll be at 9 p.m. once again, Eastern Standard Time. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.